I want to introduce for Albert Gareev. He is one of our digital accessibility subject matter expert, and he is going to address just some ways, the types of PDF accessibility problems and how you can help, combat those. So Albert, you are on.
Hello, and thank you for coming. So let me start the sharing. Before we begin, workflows for PDF remediation, they begin with understanding of the barriers. So just to make clear, in this session, we will not be talking much about remediation. We will be talking about how to spot the barriers that we want to remediate. I'm not going to talk about myself on this slide. I use it as a context placeholder to say that in my more than 10 years experience in digital accessibility, in a nutshell, I was doing like three things. Finding barriers in software and content, remediating or helping to remediate so it doesn't make to production. Also making assessment of products and the content in production available to public, finding barriers there, reporting them, and then helping to come up with a plan how it can be remediated. So the focus of this talk is on barriers. However, I have a part about importance of accessibility in PDF and especially for education, what are applicable standards and legislations. And I'm going to switch my presentation now to a real life example. So I have prepared a PDF document. You can see a screenshot of this one-page document, and I will show the document itself. And also, and thank you, Lauren, we will have it available in the chat. So if you want, you can download and take a look in your device. This is our document. It seems to be pretty straightforward, seemingly innocent, and it has statements about importance of PDF accessibility. The applicable standards are, of course, the legislation, section 508. There are web content guidelines that are somewhat applicable to PDF, and there is also universal accessibility standard for PDF. And tables is a big part of accessibility challenges. So here I have three main requirements and a sample table. Now, with that said, let me proceed with the presentation. And a challenge for the audience is that in that quote-unquote innocent document, we have quite a few accessibility problems that will manifest as barriers and that may make it inaccessible or completely inaccessible for some people. So based on the previous conversations in the chat, I noticed that there are some people who are well versed in PDF accessibility or at least have some knowledge. So feel free to post your findings. Feel free to post some notes about the barriers you saw in that one-page document. And I encourage the audience to vote for that, put some likes, put some hearts. And at the end, maybe we'll check if we have some winners, who was the most active or who was the most hawk-eyed, spotting different accessibility problems. And from time to time, I will make a pause so we can take a peek at the chat. And if I have time slots between my modules, I will read the comments. I may even answer some questions. So yes, someone says that supposedly alternative text for images is not present. Wow, really good finding about font styles, fancy stuff. So again, follow my example in the chat, cast your vote, put a like, so we'll see how many findings we get. With that, let me first say that accessibility barriers is a vast domain, and they're especially vast in PDF area. And I put that as a mind map, and as an alternative, Lauren, thank you, started posting description of each branch. The top branches are visuals, authoring, settings, and tagging. Those are like 4 categories, 4 buckets. You can put different types of barriers when you categorize them. Although it's not very necessary to categorize, but many of them have the common underlying nature or certain ways to remediate. So we can look at it this way. For example, bucket for visuals includes images, includes any visual means like styling of a text. Of course, it includes color and contrast. And it also includes visual objects such as tables, graphs, charts. And we are at authoring. So I'm going to proceed, and we will have each branch review it in details. And you can also scroll back to see the alternative description of these mind map branches. So let's begin with visuals. Yes, they say a picture is worth 1,000 words, but you can say some stuff and what words are important and what is important in which context. What are you trying to communicate with a visual? What you're trying to convey, what you want people to understand from that. And in addition, there is also a non-informative piece, which is decorations. Decorations, basically, they are either for alignment, they're for sometimes, to make things looking visually nicer, make it pleasant. Or we have such content as math or charts, again, that communicate a lot of information. And it doesn't come in a plain linear format. So let's take a closer look at images. And I am putting a little challenge to the audience again. Who would try to write an appropriate, accessible alternative text for this image? Writing alt text, in my opinion, in many ways is an art and craft. it requires skills, and skills more than just in writing. Jason says, depends on what the instructor wants to convey. Yes. So I guess we would want to know, yes, depends on the purpose. So what is the purpose of the image? What do we want to communicate? Now, we don't have any examples, but I prepared a couple of my own. Yes, night sky with constellations. Yeah. And all of those actually might be valid. Let me offer you one example. Lauren, if you could please paste it in the chat. And yes, so this is a famous NASA image made with a long-range telescope. And NASA scientists, they came up with this description and they called it short. And yes, I noticed in the chat some comments say that we need to ask a subject matter expert, because I, for example, wouldn't tell a difference between a really bright galaxy or a cloud, which is also a galaxy, or some combination of galaxies. And this is what there is technical comment about where descriptions should be placed. Yes, so that comes the piece of technology. So, for example, a few years ago, alt attribute in HTML, it wouldn't even allow having more than 255 characters as any HTML attribute. And then assistive technologies such as screen readers may not be able to read. Oh, there's a comment, it's short for a scientist. So let's take a look at the full description prepared by a scientist. Lauren, if you could please paste that. Well, while we going through this beautiful piece, which didn't even fit into the chat box, again, you see technology limitation. Let me look back to the importance of accessibility in education, especially, and how alternative text must be adequate to the purpose, must be a real alternative to visual communication, and also explain the purpose, like really why the image was posted there, what you want people to see there. Well, images, in some ways, it's a first example that comes to mind when we speak about accessible and inaccessible content. But if you go down that hole, you can see how rich is that. So this talk is based on a CCC Accessibility Center course on PDF remediation. It's about barriers. And we will consider having also a course dedicated just to alternative text for the images, because it's a huge area itself. Now, I did see in the chat that someone pointed at styling. Yes, there was intentional fancy styling with the highlighting, with the background, capitals, underline. And guess what? That's just all visual means. They are not adequately described and communicated by assistive technologies, at least not yet. But also, even if it was for some sighted user, if someone is important or something is highlighted, in many cases, it's better to say about that also in a plain language, especially again if it's some educational materials. And here you also have a chance to get some first-hand experience regarding contrast. Some people have more sharp vision, so they may have a chance to read the sentence, and some will stop somewhere halfway. Again, feel free to post in the chat how far you could go with this example at the bottom of the slide, which begins with saying, without enough contrast between text and its background. And then it's kind of fading away for me, but maybe someone could get even further. However, everything that is past the word background is not accessible. It doesn't mean doesn't meet VCAG criteria for minimal contrast. Also, contrast depends, of course, on the size of the shape. So the smaller the text gets, the harder it's getting for you. And back to our seemingly innocent accessible PDF example. Yes, we may not see and experience the barriers, but we have them there, and one of them is that 3 images did not have alternative text. So basically they're like blank space for some people. And it's not very common because no automated checkers spot issues like that, but it also matters what kind of font you use. Some fonts are too fancy, and there's a context and place for them. But if you want people to perceive and understand the text well, then better make sure that the individual characters are well distinguishable. And this is especially important for people with disabilities that have disabilities like dyslexia, for example. Well, I could go a lot with visuals, but we have 3 other branches to explore. So let me answer just the most recent question in the chat that I see, and if we have time at the end, we will cover them as well. So Sylvia asked, for issues such as poor contrast, fancy fonts, at what point it is required to change or recommended to change? So I guess required means that there is a violation, and it might be considered a legal accessibility violation, and recommended is to make it more accessible, better. So as for contrast, there are in web content accessibility guidelines, they have AA and AAA criteria. So section 508 mostly incorporates the CAG 2.0A and AA. It doesn't include AAA. So here, if a contrast is passing AA, but not passing AAA requirement for minimal contrast, then it's a distinction between required and recommended. So if possible, it's still recommended to do it for AAA or even better if there is a perception of an issue. But if AA is not met, then certainly it is required. As for the fonts, there is a set of recommended fonts. In a nutshell, each letter should be well distinguishable visually. So if they kind of touch each other too much, or different letters like L and I, they're written exactly the same way, then those are not accessible fonts. And maybe later on we post some resources pointing to the fonts that are recommended and fonts that are not considered accessible. And let's proceed now. So speaking of our vast barriers, and as we discovered that even in the visual domain, it's pretty much infinite number of ways to fail accessibility. We have the same for authoring. Authoring is about how content, whether it's a document or software, is created. So designer's choice of elements, choice of words, how it's structured or not structured. Is there any information that maybe was implied, but actually it's missing for the audience? So again, let's look at some examples. That's my favorite one. I like to use to fail all accessibility checkers. All tools happily pass all kinds of images as long as they have some text. And of course, they have no idea whether the text makes sense or not. Some advanced tools, they try to spot some generic text. So if there is an alt that says image, they may flag it. But it doesn't go further than that. And again, looping back to our PDF example, what we saw visually as the heading for accessible tables part, it was just a style text, really large font, bold, so it does look like a heading. However, it doesn't use the proper technology or tags. And because of that, assistive technologies will not be able to announce it correctly as a heading. So it becomes not distinguishable from plain text and not navigable. Same way for tables, for 3 requirements for tables, I tried to trick you and I saw that someone didn't fall for that. What we have as 1, 2, 3 is just a plain text. No list markup was used. So we have a Chandler Bing from a Friends TV show. And that TV show, yes, they played on many situations that caused some misunderstanding, basically some manifestations of barriers to understanding. And one of them, as here, is they use some jargon, some abbreviations, any uncommon words in the context of this audience. So when Chandler, and he was really upset, he said, "It throws my winners out of whack." He meant that thing, that metric they had as weekly estimated net usage statistics. They also had annual net usage statistics. So not only it may become accessibility issue, it may actually be offensive if something uncommon is used not in the right context. Again, we could spend even more, but I try to give the most representative examples. In the chat, I have a request for an image, I guess, a mind map. No other questions. So let's proceed. Oops, there is one. And yeah, I guess it took some time to type. So Rebecca is asking, Rebecca is asking, as a designer, creating accessible documents reduces significantly the creativity of the piece by not being able to use just any color or fonts. For example, maybe a separate version of the same document should be created where it is just plain black and white to meet the accessibility. This is a really great question, actually, and there is of course, there is no single answer to that. So I would say that, as Tom just said about the strategy for accessible, that IPS thing, it's very important to study the context. So if a designer is creating something like a piece of art intended for visual entertainment and uses broad range of colors, and of course the contrast between colors and between background and colors is not met, then I would say then yes. So if your intended audience is visual and the product is intended for some visual entertainment, then it's one question. However, we are in the context of accessibility in education. So as in this presentation, you can still use allow violation of contrast, as I did, to just to demonstrate that as the contrast becomes weaker, it's harder to read. However, when trying to communicate, to educate people, you need to make sure that you also repeat that in plain language. It might be a separate version of the document, it might be second page in the document. As with our Galaxy image, it might be image on one page and then one page long detailed description. However, there is such thing as universal design for learning, where they teach principles, how you can use all creativity and actually how it drives your creativity to implement content which works for very broad audience. Now let's proceed. Settings, as in vast barriers, visuals, authoring, and now settings. Settings are less about content of a PDF, but what are the part of the containing file. And here I had a challenge, because if PDF title is missing, well, it's just missing. If someone is not cited, they cannot distinguish documents without a title. It's like boxes without labels. So you have to go and open every single box, make sense of the content, and then basically in your mind, you come up with some title. But to give some entertainment, I used another technology, ChatGPT, that I instructed to help me in writing these limericks. So it goes like that. There once was a PDF so grand, but its title, oh, it was bland. No purpose was conveyed. Is a ray on display, leaving users at a loss firsthand. That was about PDF titles, and our PDF document had a visually styled text, but again, it wasn't a title. It was a box without a label if you try to access the file using assistive technology such as screen reader. Also, PDF documents, they support different language settings, and those settings, obviously, they need to be present and they need to be valid. Otherwise, it happens as the limerick says. A PDF with no language to boast will surely confuse the blind most. The text may get lost and errors may accost, making access a harder engrossed. And to clarify, without correct setting, assistive technology may not know what vocabulary to load so that it properly announces the text. Or if it converts text to Braille, and again, it doesn't have input what kind of language is used, it may generate incorrect Braille. Security settings, they are like copyright protection. They also supposedly maybe help against some editing or adding something on top of the existing document. However, assistive technology, they do need to get inside of the content. And if they can't, this is what happens. In PDF's realm, security is pride, but accessibility takes a slide. High restrictions hold sway, assistive text at bay, speech and Braille locked inside. Yes, screen readers and software generating Braille, they will be affected most. Now let's, and I saw that there was a lot going in the chat. So let me do author speak and answer just one question. How do you add language settings when there is more than one language used in the document? That's Corinne asking, and I apologize if I don't spell the name correctly. Well, unfortunately, PDF technology is not there yet in terms of accessibility. Yes, in the file settings, you can just set one language. In the web, you can specify language of a page and you can specify language of any block of text. And this will tell assistive technologies to switch and announce it appropriately. With PDF, it's a challenge. Originally, PDF was just a format for printing drafts before it goes into hard copy. So many things that we take for granted in web, beginning with tags, they were not available in PDF. So in a particular problem, when I know the context, if there is more than one language used in a document, then again, I would study it more, but off top of my head, might be worth to splitting a large document into a series and set the correct language for each ones. Might be worth to consider. Well, you know what? I will leave this question for later because context really matters here. Why there is more than one language? What was the purpose of that? And then when we know that, we can think of how we can meet the same purpose with alternative means or by providing more content. And tagging, vast barriers, visuals, authoring, settings, tagging last but not least, because tags are our containers and tags largely is what enables accessibility through assistive technologies because they do not really analyze text. They don't have neither intelligence, no potential for this, at least just yet, but they can parse tags and then try to make sense. So they, for example, if a heading tag is found, then it will be announced as a heading preceding the text of the actual heading. And again, we have this kind of problem that absence of tags, of course, is straightforward, it's completely inaccessible content, but if just one is missing or order is incorrect, then it will affect announcement, it will affect assistive technologies. Tables, of course, is a big part because they have different tags to describe structure and relationships. Math, tagging for math is evolving, but not there yet. But there are some good advancements, and we see in that it's becoming more accessible in terms of providing specific tagging and making assistive technologies to be able to announce it. So there is another thing that we pretty much consider a standard by now, reflow or responsive design for web, how it's called. Again, in a nutshell, we have different screen sizes and window sizes. We have different devices, but we want to see the text without long scroll bars, especially horizontal ones. And also for assistive technologies, we want the text to be read in the right order, whether it's a 2-column text or a 1-column. Here I want to take a closer look on how assistive technology such as screen reader announces the table. And yes, that table in the innocent quote-unquote accessible PDF also wasn't done in accessible way. I saw some comments there. So first of all, when we enter a table, because it's not just some paragraph, it needs to be announced. Also, assistive technology tells such a basic structural information as how many rows and how many columns. Special tags, they communicate structure of a table and relationships. So whenever we have a header, and without a header, table is not accessible, then we need to know which cell has what corresponding header. And when we are in a data cell, we want to know where we are, which row, which column, and then what is the column name, and then what is the actual content of the cell. Sighted users, they learn to understand this information intuitively. However, for screen reader users, it's very crucial to have proper tagging so that they can navigate from cell to cell. They can understand where they are. They can understand what data value is under which header name. And there is yet another case, which was pretty common in the early 90s, I believe, when we didn't have developed CSS for web. So some designers, they creatively used tables for visual alignment. And still, sometimes it happens. I saw it with PDF content and even on web. Sometimes it's seemingly easier, but basically it's a misuse because table markup communicates the table. Assistive technology says it's a table, and in this case, we'll have empty table. Now, feel free to repost your findings. I saw that some said this is the table from our PDF example. So if you think that there are any accessibility issues with the table from that PDF example, then feel free to post it in the chat. And what I will do, I will speak about some common requirements for tables. So first of all, table is more than just a visual drawing. It's an object. Technologies such as Adobe Reader or a web browser, they read the tags and they are coded to do visual drawing. Well, I guess I was first. No one else said that this table is actually just visual drawing. Intentionally, I left one corner not finished, so it gives away. This is just a text with some lines on top of that. So it's a blocking barrier. Now, of course, we don't have any header, even though people may read this and imply. Imagine if the table is more complex and it's about schedule for a course. So if table is inaccessible or even has table markup but still has some issues, the impact is not just someone can't understand the table. The impact, the student may miss their deadlines for ending homework or may miss some in-person events. Done with the tagging. Now let me see what do we have in chat. It was really just scrolling very quickly for me. Lots of discussions. Okay, one discussion was about language. So in web, it's much easier with Adobe. They're implementing some stuff. However, it's very difficult to remediate PDF documents in the raw format because you need to be able to read through the text, understand the structure, relationships, and stuff. So one way would be to try and convert PDF document to Microsoft Word, make corrections there, and export again. Both Adobe and Word, they have built-in accessibility checkers. You should use them. However, again, as you can see in the examples, they pick up only obvious, kind of like low-hanging fruit kind of issues. And as we covered all four, I'd like to say that, yes, around the dyschemus or mistakes are learning experiences. Before we can remediate a barrier, we need to realize that there is a barrier. And it's very much experience-based. So again, I would say whatever approach is used in accessibility, it's very important to have a mechanism for accessible feedback so that people may say, thank you for your effort. However, with this or that, I'm still experiencing problems. This way, proactive remediation will be much more effective and efficient. Another thing is that automated accessibility checkers, all these tools, even when they report problems, they report them as, for example, missing table cell tag. They do not report it in a form as a manifestation of a better to a human being, which would be that a student is struggling or unable to understand time in the timetable, or a student who is reading, let's say, some descriptions of the courses, is struggling to understand because the table is not properly marked, and the data cells, they do not correspond to the header. So when someone has a familiarity with the barriers, as in these examples and many more, then tools, they become much more helpful, because when they point to technical issues, you may understand what is the barrier, what is the impact, or maybe sometimes you can ignore, because certain technical issues, they do not manifest as accessibility barriers. I wanted to announce some winners, but the chat was so active and there were so many findings, so I'll just say that the winners are all of you, and thank you for all this engagement. And I see that there are so many people who are really skilled, and without use of any tools, without trying that document with screen reader, they quickly pointed out. So thank you, congratulations, you are the winners. And while in the chat, we're going to post information about further options for education, for opportunities for training provided by CCC Accessibility Center. Let me conclude with the final limerick. In the realm of digital spaces, accessibility finds its places. With equal access for all, inclusion stands tall. In a limerick, it leaves its traces. Thank you. And we have some time for the questions. Plus, there is a break upcoming, so I can stay a bit longer, and we'll try to cover what we can.
Thank you, Albert. Are there any questions from the chat? You can raise your hand, unmute yourself. Yes, Pauline.
I do have a question. You mentioned have to have alternative text on all the images. So if I do not have alternative images, but is it not ADA compliant? Is not good? Does it violate the ADA at all?
Yeah, that's a very important question. And yes, images are used everywhere, so it's very universal. Again, if images are there for a purpose different than some decoration, different for some purely visual presence and experience, then the main question would be, why are they there? What is the purpose? What they're supposed to communicate? And then it will depend on the actual technology that implements the content. So whether it's PDF, whether it's web or something else. And then what are available techniques in that technology, and what are limitations? So if you, and I think I saw your question in the chat as well, Pauline. So if you have an image, the image has blank alt text in the tags. However, right below the image, you actually explain the same what is supposed to communicate, then that piece of content is accessible because you provide alternative. Also, sometimes I would say it's even recommended to provide plain language description, not just in alt text, but within the content, so that it brings attention. Sometimes people tend to focus on text and miss the images, and if an image is intended to convey something important, it would really benefit the audience, especially the students, to say that, for example, as you could see in the image above, and I fall back to my galaxies example, right? That we have 5 main galaxies and they have this spectrum. And then, for example, you proceed in your STEM course saying that spectrum of stars is measured using this or that methods. This way, you have a visual, but you also have plain text. And as I like to say as well, when you make something accessible, it benefits everyone. Sometimes it actually becomes a common practice, right? Like intersection cuttings that originally they were intended as an accessibility measure. It's actually more convenient, and it's not only for wheelchair users, but for some young mother that has a stroller, or push buttons in subway, especially in morning rush hour. It's very convenient to press the button so you keep the door open. Did I fully answer the question?
Yeah, I understand. Does it apply to the videos and the tables? They have the description or all this? Because my video don't have captions when they record. Those are old videos. So do I need to, how does those, like, because up right now, the new one, usually we have captions on those videos. But how about those old ones? So can I put a short description of the videos or a short description on the tables? It will do the same kind of work that like the images have a description.
Videos are different kind of content, and there's a set of requirements for that. In short, first of all, there are tools that allow captioning of old videos that didn't have it. And again, at the Accessibility Center, we have a course, and I believe CCC Tech Center offers a tool, Shire tool, for captioning of videos. More importantly, for even better accessibility, transcript should be provided. However, just a transcript is not a fully accessible alternative, because people cannot simultaneously watch a video and read a transcript, or at least it will not be the same experience. As for tables, well, tables are visually they're rendered as lines and rows. Really, it's about proper markup, and there is a tagging element for tables, both in PDF and web, that allows to provide a kind of alt text description for a table, similarly as for image, which describes the purpose of the table, talks more about the relationships. So here it's contextual. It's not required always, all the time. It depends on the complexity of the table. If a table is fairly straightforward, like one header table, and everything is properly tagged, assistive technologies, they will be able to describe on their own, describe the structure, the relationships, and help people to navigate to that table. Well, thanks for your question, and I see okay, so why does PDF content seem to have much more accessibility problems than web content? And yes, there is an answer. Yeah, PDF is evolving. They're trying to make it more accessible, but originally it wasn't. The concept of tagging was introduced later. There are much less tags, much less attributes, and while web since then went ahead, so we have, for example, web area or accessible rich internet applications or the special additional tags and attributes. We don't have much of that with PDF. The second apart piece for PDF is that it's distributable. It's portable. You don't have to go somewhere to a server and connect to get the content as is with web pages. However, one of common practices is to combine. So, for example, if you need people to fill in a form, whenever possible, rather than making forms in PDF that are unable to fulfill 100% accessibility requirements, you can have some web form that provides users with help, gives some explanations, also has some error validation, has suggestions for correction, and then when everything is submitted properly, then a program can also generate PDF document, which is not a form anymore and which is much more straightforward.
It looks like I see one last question from Jason that we can take before lunch. He asks have you come across any AI tools that help make PDFs accessible?
Right. So that was more than 2 decades ago in my master's degree work on methods for artificial intelligence. And since then, I am yet to see any real artificial intelligence. And I'm kind of afraid of that because who knows how it will turn out. So all those AI is more like, marketing buzzwords. They do not have any intelligence. They're very complex programs. They can configure themselves and adjust themselves on the fly, but they're far away from real intelligence. And even with the example of this limerick, right? So it took me a number of rounds to create something good because ChatGPT acts pretty much like autocomplete, and many of those rhymes, they were laughable at best, and some of them actually were exclusive because again there is no intelligence behind.
Okay. Well, thank you, Albert. We are going to end this, and we really enjoyed your presentation and